Okay, welcome to this Friday edition of the SumerSports Show. I'm Eric Eager. I am going to be hosting the Friday show every single week throughout the NFL season by myself. It should be a lot of fun. I'm excited. We're 1 week away. Like this time next week, we're going to be talking about the Kansas City Chiefs against the Detroit Lions and what actually happened on the field in a real NFL game. So that is incredibly exciting. I'm looking forward to all the things that that game entails. The Kansas City Chiefs right now without Chris Jones, presumably have fallen from 7-point favorites at times during this offseason to 6-point favorites. The total has jumped from 53-ish to the mid 50s. Again, it should be a good time as far as that is concerned here. I know that we're having a little bit of trouble. We had some trouble on Wednesday's show where when we went live, we're having a little bit of a trouble with Twitter here. YouTube should be fine. Things like that, Facebook, all that stuff should be fine for the live show. So thank you all for your patience. And I am going to talk a little bit here. Beat Gamer 99. What's the plan for podcast in season? Are you going to do preview Monday and preview Wednesday? So yeah, absolutely. So a couple things. This show, the SumerSports Show with Eric Eager and Thomas Dimitrov, we will be having this show at 3 o'clock Eastern, Mondays and Wednesdays, time and God willing. So we're going to have Thomas back twice a week. I'm going to do this show Fridays, probably around this time at 5 Eastern every single week. And then we're going to have two new shows. The first new show is Stats and Schemes for Tej Seth and Sean Syed. That is going to be the first. That's going to be Tuesday every single week. I don't believe that they're going to go live with the show because it's not going to be particularly timely. But Sean Syed and Tej Seth will give people a taste of their differing opinions on the world of football. And then on Thursdays, we're going to continue to have Parker Fleming interview guests around the NFL sphere in his podcast, The Odd Man Front. So that's going to be Parker Fleming. That's going to be Thursday. So we're going to have you covered every single day throughout this season. It's going to be Monday, Wednesday, Friday with me and Thomas on Mondays and Wednesdays. And then Tuesdays will be Tej, Seth, and Sean Syed. And Thursdays will be Parker Fleming. So I'm extremely excited about what this entails for us at SumerSports. Sean, Parker, and Tej have done a tremendous job throughout this entire off season, and they deserve a shot. And so they're going to get their own podcast starting next week. Okay, this has been kind of an interesting week, right? Last week we did not have a Friday version of the show. We had some interviews while we were at Circa Sports. Jeff Benson, who runs the sports book there, we interviewed him. We also interviewed Aaron Oster, who basically ran that entire weekend last week when we were at Circa. Did a tremendous job, a great mind Tampa Bay Bucks fan for all of that. For those that are keeping score at home, that was a very good set of episodes. We also had Matthew Collar, whose book, which we talked about in this show a few months ago, Football is a Numbers Game, is out next month, which should be great. Matthew chronicles the rise and current state of Pro Football Focus. There's a chapter in there about me. There's a chapter in there about Tej, a few others, one about Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, the Minnesota Vikings GM. A fantastic read. While we're talking about books, I did get my book in the mail this past week, Football Analytics with Python and R, for anybody who's interested, by myself and one of my good friends, Richard Erickson. You can go ahead and purchase that on Amazon as well. So now people know that this bookshelf back here is real because I just took real actual books off of it. My wife did a wonderful job building that for me. Just briefly, we're not really a college football podcast, but I do kind of want to review what's happened so far. Week 0 was a lot of fun. We had, Caleb Williams looking every bit the Caleb Williams that we've expected. That's an explosive USC team. I do wonder, though, their defense was being dragged up and down the field by San Jose State, so that is not good. You don't like that. A lot of people, when we were there, were betting Ohio against San Diego State. And of course, their quarterback gets injured right away. Probably was a good bet. Number moved in their direction. But ultimately, with a backup quarterback, they were not to be. The game didn't go over, and the game did not cover. If you liked Ohio there, so a rough situation on hand there. So that was a little bit of a recap of Week 0. Jacksonville State did pretty well in their first time, time, in the FBS. They've competed really well in the FBS as a member of the FCS, but they were able to come in and do a good job last week. And then last night we had our first couple of Week 1 games. I was watching Minnesota, Nebraska as a person from Minnesota who also went to Nebraska. That game was amazing. That game was a true privilege. 13-10, Minnesota comes back. A wide receiver there made a fantastic catch to tie the game. And of course, Nebraska with Jeff Sims threw an interception while they were driving for the game-winning field goal. And Minnesota ended up being able to kick their own game-winning field goal. Ryan Nelson, longtime listener to the show, LSU FSU is going to be wild like last year. Absolutely. I think that is going to be a very interesting game. Last year, people remember that game, I think, went under because of a missed PAT at the end. And ultimately LSU won that game as a dog, and the game went under because of a missed extra point at the end. LSU kind of coming back from the depths of the Edo trough after their college football playoff national championship with Brian Kelly will win Week 1 last year. Maybe they didn't deserve. Mike Norvell's FSU team ended up playing pretty well down the stretch last year with Jordan Travis at quarterback. So it'll be a fun college football season. It's weird because obviously we're not betting here at Sumer. So I'm not sweating out like 50 against the spread / total bets like I was at PFF every Saturday for those weeks. So I think my relationship with football will be a lot healthier than it has been in the past. But yeah, I'm excited for college football this year. I'm excited to watch Drake May play. I'm excited for Caleb Williams. We will have some draft content up. We actually just secured somebody to write for the website, TJ McCreed, who is a former NFL scout. It should be a lot of fun. What you're going to see on that website. So I'm incredibly enthusiastic for that, and as well as the NFL season. Getting on to the news of the week. We had a signing by the Minnesota Vikings of one of their big name players. Unfortunately, for I think Vikings fans, it wasn't Justin Jefferson, who was voted by his peers as the second best player in all of NFL last year. It was TJ Hockenson, and TJ Hockenson signed this contract, making him the richest tight end in the history of the NFL. This is from our friends at Over the Cap. Now, interestingly, the cap number for Hockenson dropped significantly in 2023 to about $5 million. So they get a little bit of cap relief there. Only a $9.9 million guaranteed salary in 2024. That's basically, if you were to look at like the tag, it's a little bit shy of that. You do have to prorate the bonus in year 2, as well as some roster bonuses and things like that. So the cap number is a little bit higher next year than it would have been had they franchise tagged him, but from the guaranteed standpoint, effectively the same. And then from here on out, you get some pretty decent, I think, numbers for the Vikings as well as Hockenson. So Hockenson gets the $18 million signing bonus. He gets the about 11 million in guaranteed salary. And then beyond that, the Vikings are pretty well protected here. I mean, by the time you get to 2026, they can cut him and kind of keep 12.5 million in year 4 and 18 million in year 5. So I think this is good work by Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, but I also think it's good work by Hockenson and his agent, because he obviously does get the distinction of being the highest paid tight end in NFL history, even though from the Vikings perspective, they are very protected here. So I know, Kwesi's a friend of mine. Like I don't mean to always sort of, back him up. I do think that there are some decisions he's made that I wouldn't have made, but I think in this case, this is a very good contract for both the player and the team. And so the question obviously that's coming up is, what's happening with Justin Jefferson? I've said a number of times on the show, I think that, back when I did, this show about 2 or 3 months ago. I said, look, I don't think Justin Jefferson should play a game, practice at all, let alone, without a contract, right? He's coming off of year 3. He's had one of the most historic 3-year stretches in the history of NFL wide receivers, let alone the first 3 years of a career. He's earned the opportunity to sort of sit out or sit in or whatever and get a new contract. From what I'm hearing on the inside, or from what I'm hearing, like from my, friends who cover the team, but also people who kind of know things, it's puzzling. I'm actually, interested as to why they haven't signed him to a deal. But from the perspective of the Vikings, like, good, like, look, you don't have to put that money up front right now. They might as well go into it. I think with Jefferson, though, if he were to get hurt or something like that, I think he's proven enough that he's going to get the contract regardless. But if I were him, I'd try to get that money now. So I find it kind of an interesting predicament for Minnesota. Not predicament, but I think that they've gotten a huge comeuppance here from him not asking for a new contract and sort of spreading it out. Maybe some of that is him worrying about uncertainty with respect to Kirk Cousins and where the quarterback position is going to be next year. Because right now, if they were to go into the year, Jaron Hall is their only young option at quarterback next year. Now that Trey Lance has been traded to the Dallas Cowboys. Speaking of, I think the Trey Lance. Let's take some listener email. So Ryan Nelson comment here on the YouTube. Do you think Andy's conservative 4th down decisions will hurt against the Lions? They are to live. They are live to win, especially if you kick field goals. Yeah, I agree. I mean, Detroit's only, this is a 6-point underdog. This is not a, college football 21.5-point favorite, 28.5-point favorite type of thing. Like, the Lions are live to win this game. And in fact, the last time Jared Goff played the Chiefs, like, they put up over 50 points and won. I mean, and this offense, I think for Detroit, maybe they're not quite as deep at wide receiver as those Rams teams were. I think Ben Johnson's every bit the play caller that Sean McVay is. I think the Chiefs defense is every bit as weak as they have been. Jones being out, in theory. I still think there's an outside shot. Jones signs a contract and plays soon, but it's not a favorite right now. And I think that with L'Jarius Sneed having kind of a bulky knee, now I know he's practiced, kind of held in all of camp, I think, for a new contract. Chiefs didn't budge there, so he's going to come in. I think he's probably healthier than the reports say. I think he's probably holding in for a new deal. They didn't give it to him, so he comes back there. They have, they're deeper at linebacker than they were last year, but the defensive line, no Frank Clark, no Chris Jones, so they're going to have to, Felix Anazuke-Uzama is going to have to actually play pretty well for this thing to make sense for them. So yeah, I think Detroit is absolutely live. And if Andy kicks field goals instead of goes for it on 4th and 1, Dan Campbell in a game like that is going to go for all the 4th downs and try to win. And so it could lead to a Chiefs blowout, but I also think it could lead to Detroit being more frisky in the game than we anticipate. Beat Gamer 99, good question here. Isn't the best interest of Jefferson to wait? Like, even if he gets hurt, he will be paid by any team. Yeah, but the thing is, the earlier, so again, yes, I think that Jefferson's shown enough that unless he has like a Teddy Bridgewater type knee injury, he's going to be paid eventually by the Minnesota Vikings. Absolutely. But, in the few, the issue is of course, he might be waiting. Look, his draft class, Jerry Jeudy, CeeDee Lamb, none of those guys haven't signed deals. He might be waiting on those guys to sign deals so he can slide in comfortably ahead because he is the better of the players. That could be the case for sure. And so maybe he's waiting on them. That being said, the earlier you sign your second deal is the earlier you sign your third deal. And I think in the NFL, obviously getting drafted in the NFL gets you a measure of wealth that most people don't have. Once you get your second contract, then you're kind of almost set for life in a certain way. But when you get that third contract in the NFL, you are financially goaded in a certain way, right? What I get worried about if I'm on the player side for some of these guys who are, incredible talents, is what I get concerned about on the player side is almost always this idea of get your second contract as quickly as you can so you can get your third contract as quickly as you can. And for players who are as good as Jefferson, that should be the goal. The goal should be the third contract financially set, for generations And the further you push off the second contract, of course, the further you push off the third contract. But Beat Gamer makes a good point. Wait for Chase. So the issue with the Chase thing is Burrow hasn't even been signed yet. And so the Bengals, if they haven't signed Burrow after 3 years, then I don't know if they're going to sign Chase after 3 years. And so if Jefferson is waiting for Chase, he might be waiting for a while. And I think the Bengals are, I think a lot of people are saying, oh, they were waiting for Herbert to get Burrow done. And I don't know. I think the Bengals have, some financial restrictions that some other teams don't. And maybe they're just, on their own time. As Beat Gamer says, Burrow is an issue. Yeah. I mean, they really, they haven't even paid Jamar Chase yet. And with all indications, it seems like they want to pay Chase as well. And he's worth it, I think. It's going to be weird for them having 110 million of a $240 million cap in 3 players, but they are the 3 best players, 3 most valuable players on the team, at least. Another thing that we saw is kicker trades, which is really funny because we saw Cade York get cut by the Cleveland Browns. We've seen Jake Moody from Michigan struggle with injuries and stuff for San Francisco. I mean, we've been through this a million times. My former colleague at Timo Risky at PFF, brilliant guy, wrote an article showing, like, when you look at the credible intervals for kickers, most of the credible intervals include 0 or average, except for Justin Tucker. So that it's crazy to think about this, but even if a kicker is kicked in the NFL, it's hard to garner enough evidence that he's good to pay him. Okay. Guys like, guys like Tucker, certainly guys like Carlson, Jake Elliott for the Eagles, like guys like that, I think there's a ton of evidence that they're good. And so paying them, to me, isn't a huge deal, but there certainly isn't anywhere close to enough signal for a college kicker to say anything, close to evidence that this player should be drafted, especially not in the first 2 days of a draft. And I would even say round 4 in the case of Cade York. These are just decisions that are first order rules of thumb. You don't need SumerSports. You don't need analytics. You don't need, anything of that sort. You just need to look at like baseline first order evidence to see that drafting kickers is on average just a strictly negative EV move. And over time. And again, it's not that these kickers can't be good. It's that the time that it takes for them to demonstrate that they're good and the fact that there are no backups. So, if you draft Trey Lance and he doesn't show it right away, you can sit him on the bench and play a different guy. These teams don't carry 2 kickers. Hell, they don't carry 3 quarterbacks, most of them. So for you to draft a kicker and to ride it out with him, you have to have some serious brass balls to do that. And I just don't think that the average NFL team is willing to do that. And I've seen it, like in Minnesota, they brought in Blair Walsh. Blair Walsh was 12 for 12 from 50 yards as a rookie. Started to struggle in 13, was pretty bad in 14, terrible in 15. They go all the way, they go all the way into the middle of 2016 before they even cut him. And that's after they gave him a deal to sort of like save the marriage. It's just the kicker thing is teams are not as quick to move on from a guy who clearly can't kick anymore. Because of the draft capital. And to me, I think that you got to be able to move on. You got to be willing to move on from those players if they don't show it, because that's, winning. You play out a game and you get to a point where a kicker is 80% to kick to win you a game and he misses. You can't have that too often. And unfortunately, whether you draft a kicker or not, it doesn't seem to influence whether or not the ball goes into the net. And yet, whether you draft a kicker or not is, generally speaking, going to determine whether or not you give them the rope to play with, into years 1, 2, and 3, and 4. So it's just a negative EV move, and we're seeing that now. And we're seeing teams now trading for kickers. I still think that's a little speculative. I wouldn't necessarily trade for like a Dustin Hopkins. I wouldn't necessarily trade for those kind of guys because, again, even with them, there's a rare case that that a kicker's good or not. Nate Kading, for example, was fantastic for San Diego, missed a bunch of playoff kicks, never was the same. Like, this is just a position where you need to be able to discard players fairly quickly. And I know that that's not as humane as we like to be on this show, but it's the God's honest truth about the position and about trying to win. Nick Bosa and Chris Jones are still holding out. Both are paying a tremendous amount of well, Chris Jones is certainly paying a tremendous amount of money per game just to hold out here. I think, with in both cases, both guys seem willing to hold it, to wait it out. And in the case of both players, you've seen Pittsburgh money coming in. Pittsburgh was 3-point dogs, I'm sorry, at home against San Francisco week 1. You've seen a lot of Pittsburgh money. That thing has moved shy of 3 now. Because I think a lot of people are wising up to the fact that Pittsburgh was one of the better teams in the NFL on offense when it came to EPA per play in the second half last year. I don't think many people, when they look at the raw box score stats for Kenny Pickett or looking at the yards per carry stats for Najee Harris, would ever have guessed that Pittsburgh was actually a pretty solid offense down the stretch last year. I think people are starting to wise up to the Tomlin plus the Pickett plus the skill position kind of angle on the Steelers, but they're also selling the 49ers without Nick Bosa. I think Bosa is a, one of a kind type of player in the NFL. And, without him, that's not as good of a defense. Especially because they do a lot. Like, their defense is interesting because it's really, really good, but it depends upon a few cornerstone players being there and being healthy. Fred Warner, of course, being one of them. Bosa being another. Taliahonga is another one. And without those guys, I just don't think that they're as solid. And they put more pressure on Brock Purdy, which I don't think you want if you're a San Francisco fan or backer. As far as Chris Jones, and we've litigated this a ton, I think Chris Jones's camp is asking for the moon. The Chiefs are not willing to give it to him. I think the Chiefs are being very generous in their offers. That's what I'm gathering. And it just hasn't worked out so far. So I think, unfortunately for Kansas City, you have the best player in the league on your team, and you can probably win some of these games without him. It's not going to be as simple, though, without Chris Jones. I would not be surprised if he signed relatively soon or showed up and played sparingly in the first few weeks, but I also would not be surprised if we didn't see him until week 8 and he wanted to just come back to accrue a season. Here's some here's some comments. Ryan Nelson, Lance could bring back a running element at the QB position for Dallas. Dak hasn't run much after the 2020 leg injury. I agree. I think I think Dak's the best quarterback in the NFC, but I also think that he's leaving a lot of value on the table by not running. And the injuries, of course, I think are hurting his desire to run. But I also think, look, this is a league where teams are willing to buy into quarterbacks, but Dak has a few things going against him. He wasn't drafted that high, and we know draft capital sticks with players, right? The Washington Commanders were not willing to sign Kirk Cousins in large part because they thought he was overcoming an eval that wasn't particularly good. So Dak has that against him. He's also he's also high variance. And I think a lot of people prefer low variance to high variance in the NFL. And so Dak's got to be careful about how he negotiates here because his cap hit next year is about $61 million. They probably want to go to the table and reduce that. They probably want to go to the table and have a guy like Trey Lance behind him so that they have at least a little bit of leverage. And that's an important thing to realize when considering the possibility of what Lance represents for the 49ers. Beat Gamer 99 surprise New Orleans let's go. Yeah, Will Lutz, other than injuries, has proven to be a pretty good kicker in the NFL. I am surprised as well that they let him go, and you wonder if the kicker that they brought in were to struggle, whether or not they're going to end up regretting that. I tend to think, saving money on kickers, punters, long snappers, when you're talking about a few $1 million, to me, it's penny rich, pound poor. Once you have a guy that has shown to be successful in your environment, as long as he doesn't fall off a cliff, I think you keep him around. And I know that's a little bit weird to say because I just said don't draft kickers. Again, I think that once a guy's around, $1 million or $2 million isn't much on the cap. Beat Gamer 99. I still don't trust the Steelers when they play the Ravens twice without Lamar late. Yeah, I agree. I don't think you take much out of the Steelers' last year record of 9-8. I think you more look at kind of the ingredients that the team has, and specifically Mike Tomlin and how he's able to overcome a lot. He always scores really poorly in the decision making in game and stuff like that, but as far as getting that team up to play, there's no coach better in the NFL, I think, right now than him. You have Vrabel, you have Belichick. as guys as well who don't necessarily make the best in-game decisions, but win more than expected. Yeah, so yeah, I think that it should be a decent season. I don't have the Steelers making the playoffs only because I think the rest of the division, the rest of the conference is too strong. But I think that they're compelling to me. And I think week 1 against San Francisco is like a classic, small road favorite that a lot of people, a lot of square bettors, a lot of recreational bettors are going to bet the 49ers. Oh, they only have to win by a field goal. And people forget how hard it is to win on the road in the NFL. People forget how hard it is to go West Coast to at least, Midwest/East Coast type town like Pittsburgh. I can see why sharp bettors like the Steelers in this game. I found it funny. Alex Ingold gets a contract extension, 3 years, kind of $18 million. Some of that money that was going to go to Jonathan Taylor in a trade that wasn't ever actually going to happen goes to Alex Ingold. Look, like a fullback in that offense is probably pretty valuable. You have to go look, at the grades and stuff. Like Juszczyk has been, very good for the 49ers. I've always, because I played this position in college, like I'm always kind of more of a, hey, use your tight ends as fullbacks. But if you find a fullback that's good in that offense, then you have to sort of roll with it. So I find that Alex Ingold contract amusing. I think he's a good player. I think he adds something to that offense. And that I'm cool. It's cool that they rewarded a player like that. Dean asked a good question. He said, will you do recaps of games during the season? So this is, by the way, if you go to SumerSports.com, go ahead and sign up for our newsletter. Either it'll prompt you for it or there's a link to it on the website. We will have newsletters that are coming out twice a week. One that recaps all the games from Sundays, and that's going to be a recap of, how much leverage did that game have in the postseason? What were the most exciting games from a win probability standpoint, et cetera, et cetera. We will also have a newsletter that is going to preview the week's games. Again, leverage, how, if the Steelers win or lose, what's the delta in the playoff probabilities? What is the most exciting game? So we have an index for how exciting the games are. So if you have, DirecTV or something like that, or in this case, it's YouTube TV now to watch Sunday Ticket, you can go in and see directly which games are more compelling than other games. So that should be really fun. Some really good work there by my team on that. And so you should have, if you sign up for the email newsletter, by the start of the season, you should end up getting access to that. Thomas and I will review games, and I will review the Thursday Night Football game here on the Friday episode and preview the Sunday games. I will also be coming out with a column on Fridays. Basically, it's just going to be my Friday thoughts, and a lot of that is going to be some of the podcast material we're going to have on Friday. So, Dean, we're going to have some very, very we're going to have you covered this year, which will be right, a lot of fun. Ryan said the weather is beautiful in the South during the fall. Nice breeze replacing the heat smashing your face. Absolutely, and I'm excited for that. Look, I grew up in Minnesota. I went home for Christmas. I forgot how cold it is there. I forgot what I had to deal with as a kid. I moved to Cincinnati, and it was cold in the winter, but I never had to shovel snow. I'm excited that it's actually going to be somewhat warm here during the winter. I've never experienced that in my life in living in a place. So I'm really thrilled for that. A couple more things I wanted to talk about. Firstly, I want to talk about Jonathan Taylor. Taylor is on the pup. So, if you're going to draft in your fantasy playoffs, make sure that you're getting him at a late enough round so that he ends up being a value for you as opposed to somebody you're actually counting on. I got some pushback from Colts Twitter, which I got to be honest with you. I find caping for a guy like Jim Irsay, who, look, he's got his issues, right? He owns an NFL team. He deserves our respect. But I find the caping for a guy who was kind of sending hey, running backs don't matter tweets, as well as some other unhinged things about Jonathan Taylor. I find that a little weird from Colts Twitter. What I tweeted out was, saying he's not worth paying, but also asking for Jalen Waddle for him in a trade seems inconsistent. And a lot of Colts fans said, well, they never said he wasn't worth paying. Yes, they have. If they haven't paid him yet and he wants to be paid, what they are saying is you're not worth paying. Just the same way as if somebody came up to me and said, hey, like somebody comes to my door and asks me to buy Girl Scout cookies, and I say, I don't want to come back next week. What I'm really saying is I don't want to pay for them right now. And I don't think they're worth buying right now. And so, even if they haven't said it explicitly, and I think Jim Irsay's tweet about running backs said explicitly, we don't think Jonathan Taylor's worth the money. With their actions, they've said he's not worth it. And so with your actions saying he's not worth paying, and then asking the Dolphins for the second most valuable player on their team, to me feels inconsistent. And I'm not exactly sure if they come out looking particularly good and giving him kind of a very giving him a very like thin request of a trade kind of situation, not trading him, but also not paying him. I like for these teams to be a little bit consistent. And Beat Gamer says Irsay doesn't want to pay anyone because they had a losing season. He doesn't want to reward that. You're certainly but then trade a player, right, while he has value, or trade a player who wants to. Now they don't have to, but he's not required to play. Like he can sit out. And so I think my biggest frustration here with the Colts is not that they're not paying Jonathan Taylor. Like, I'm an analytics guy. Like I still think that the value of running backs is lower than maybe market value in some cases. But if you're going to be a running backs don't matter kind of, if you're going to project a running backs don't matter vibe, you better live by it. Like, don't be like, oh, we don't think running backs are valuable, but we really want Jonathan here. I don't think that that's a cool or consistent, sort of message. And to me, I think, I think it's disappointing from them. Trade him or keep him and pay him. Don't kind of do this intermediate thing, because these players, and I talked about this a little bit earlier, this is the hole in the theory that you can draft non-premium positions and just play them 4 years and let them walk. We saw with Jonathan Taylor, he's like, no, I'm going to filibuster this situation and get paid. And frankly, a guy, and this is a premium position, Justin Jefferson should be doing the same thing, and so forth. So I'm very perplexed by it. We at Sumer have been drafting fantasy teams. We have Taylor on a few of them. I'm a little disappointed with that, but for the most part, I'm just disappointed that this situation, like, again, if you're not going to pay running backs, great. Be consistent though, and don't project two different messages, because the players see right through it. They follow actions, not talk. The last thing I want to talk about before we leave for our Friday is Gil Brandt. Gil Brandt passed away. Former player evaluator for the Cowboys, an absolute legend. I do want to talk to Thomas about him Monday on the podcast. I'm going to leave a little bit for that, but a real pioneer. I mean, somebody wrote he was analytics before analytics, and I agree with that. Like, look, anytime somebody has a consistent way of documenting performance and they use it to their advantage, that's analytics. And I think Gil Brandt very much deserves the praise he's been getting, since he passed. Football lost a huge legend there. And it's sad, but obviously, you smile about the life that he lived, which was a very broad and a very impactful one in that game that we all love. So RIP to Gil Brandt, and our thoughts are with his family and everything during this time. We're gonna cut. We're gonna go a little bit shorter here with this one. Part of it, just to give you guys an idea of what life is like. I was in a meeting with the developers and stuff for our side of the business just now, and it went about 15 minutes late. So we're 15 minutes to get started with this one. But I think we covered a lot of ground. Like I said, I think the Hockenson, just to kind of review, I think the Hockenson deal was good for both Hockenson and the Vikings. I think Kwesi gets the first, our analytics GM, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, gets his first trophy, right? He traded for Hockenson, stuck his neck out on the line. Didn't work for Jalen Reagor, didn't work for Ross Blacklock, works for TJ Hockenson. He gives him an extension. It's an extension that I think is fairly reasonable for the Vikings. We talk about how you should never draft kickers, and why, kicker trades have happened. Nick Bosa, Chris Jones, both holding out. Alex Ingo gets an extension. Jonathan Taylor on the PUP list now because of the holdout as well as some injuries. And RIP to Gil Brandt. So, like I said, sign up for our newsletter. We're going to have some updates to the website. They're going to go live Monday. So we're going to have stats on wide receivers, running backs, tight ends, all for your fantasy and gambling needs, as well as team defense and stuff like that. So I'm really excited for that. See that. Look out for that next week. Enjoy the Labor Day weekend. A very American holiday. So we really appreciate everybody for coming. And it's also a Canadian holiday as well. And CFL has not started yet. I like the Alouettes this week. So if you're looking to bet on the CFL, the Alouettes on Saturday tomorrow, I think +3.5, +4 is a good bet. I make the game 3. So for Eric Eager, this has been the SumerSports Show. We thank you all for coming. We can't wait for our new lineup next week. And have a great weekend.